This video is probably going to make a lot of people mad. Maybe not a lot of people, some people mad. I don't care. It's just my opinion on this subject that a lot of people are talking about, and rightfully so. It's something I've talked about before, and that's the video game industry and the health of the video game industry. Because I feel like there's a lot of, maybe not wrong opinions out there, but a lot of misinformed opinions when it comes to the health of the video game industry. Because you see pretty much every day, it seems like in 2024 at least, every day you get on social media, you hear more about, this company's laying off a bunch of people. This company's laying off a bunch of people, and they're household names. These aren't small companies or anything like that. They're big companies. Look at what just happened with Sony, essentially closing down full studios a few days after posing with Jim Ryan, wishing him well and goodbye. Like, it's happening very suddenly, and it's happening very rapidly. And people are quick to point out and say, and just shift all the blame onto CEOs and shareholders, because you got to keep the shareholders happy, and the CEOs need to get their big bonuses and, get another yacht and stuff like that. I think that does play a role. I'm not saying it doesn't play a role, because obviously it does. And yes, there are things that the executives could potentially do to sort of mitigate some of this stuff. But to say that that's the only reason, to say that that's the sole reason, I feel is like an absolute disservice to the people who are getting laid off at these companies. Because if that's their mentality, the only reason I got let go is because of some greedy CEO, like, that's just inherently wrong. Are we in a video game crash? Right now, no, but we're headed towards one. It's definitely something that's looming on the horizon, and this is kind of the cracks in the foundation of this video game industry. Well, RGT, wait just a doggone minute. Video games 4% year over year over last year. Why would all this stuff be happening right now? Well, that would be like examining the video game industry in its own little bubble and pretending that the rest of the world doesn't exist and doesn't work. Because I don't know if you've looked around at the economy right now, it's not exactly in the best shape. And there's been ebbs and flows with economic stuff. I'm not going to get political on this or anything like that. But there's a little thing called inflation. And inflation seems to constantly be rising. And inflation actually affects the video game industry in a large manner. Because in order to keep up with inflation, yes, you do have to keep your profits up. And yes, you do have to keep your revenue up. But the problem is, are those two things lining up right now? Because inflation doesn't just apply to the companies themselves and the games themselves. It involves so much more. And I feel like inflation also impacts the video game development costs. Let's look at video game development costs right now. I'm not talking about smaller games. I'm talking about bigger titles, bigger AAA games, mainline games and franchises, so on and so forth. The development costs of these things have gotten so high. They're at an all-time high. And it's not just because the games themselves are getting bigger, but it's because of all of the people that you had to have involved with the games themselves. You have to have all of these people on your staff, and with, the economy not being in the best shape that it's in and inflation being a thing, you have to pay people more. Then you have to pay people for rent because you don't own the building, you're renting the building. Then you have to pay for developing technology and keeping up with the Jones. Do you see where I'm getting at with this? Video games take so much longer to make now than they did back in the day. Look at how many Grand Theft Auto games you had on the PlayStation 2. You had 3 brand new games, and then that was just mainline, and then you had offshoot games that were released on other platforms that ended up coming to it. Do you see anything like that in the open world landscape right now with video games? No, because development costs are extremely high. Shenmue was one of the most expensive games to develop for Sega, and while it might not have killed the company, it sure as hell didn't help the situation that they were in, because that game cost a lot of money to make, and they didn't really make that much money back. It's also other companies that are involved in things, which you see in these licensed games. A game like Spider-Man 2, we saw in those Insomniac leaks how much it costs to make that game, how much of a percentage that Disney gets for using the Spider-Man license, what Disney's demands were for stuff like this. Like, it's crazy. The video game industry has grown a lot. And one of the reasons why it grew so much, and one of the reasons why these companies tended to grow so much, was because of COVID. Look at COVID. Look at what it did for most of the world. It crippled it, except for one industry. One industry managed to thrive during COVID, and it was the video game industry. Because people were stuck at home. So they're buying consoles. They're buying games. Look at Animal Crossing, New Horizons. Do you honestly think Animal Crossing New Horizons would have sold as many copies as it did if it did not come out during a COVID time frame? That was the perfect storm, the perfect game at the perfect time. I'm not saying the game would have done bad or anything like that, but when you look at the sales of that game, I feel like they were definitely sort of, higher than they would have been if the game came out during a normal time frame. So during this time frame of COVID, where video games are selling very well, where consoles are selling very well, of course these companies are going to be short-sighted and be like, we need to grow, we need to get bigger. We've got all this money coming in, let's spend some of this money, let's grow, we can make bigger and better games. But what ends up happening is the cost of these games is just so exponentially high right now that one false move, one misstep can cripple a company, can literally sink an entire company. That's why you see things like remakes and remasters. That's why we're seeing these long gaps in time between games releasing. And I know what you're saying to yourself. Well, RGT, what about Nintendo? They're the best. They've never done anything bad and laid people off. Except for when Nintendo's business wasn't doing all that well. And people are quick out to point out Mr. Iwata. And for the longest time, I was not privy to this. And I feel like a lot of people aren't privy to this. But when Mr. Iwata took a pay cut at Nintendo, it was seen as like the most honorable thing in the world. And people love to bring that up nowadays when talking about companies laying people off. Well, why didn't they just do this with the CEOs? Why don't the CEOs take a pay cut to keep these employees? Because that's Japanese law. There's 3 things that you can do when a company is in a decline before you lay somebody off. And one of those 3 things, by law, is taking a pay cut. What happened around that same time for Nintendo when Mr. Iwata took his pay cut? They laid off 320 employees at Nintendo of Europe, most of them being full-time employees. So Nintendo isn't necessarily immune to this, but they do have a bit of an advantage because they never got into the graphics war. They never got into anything like that. So because of that, their games do have a bit of a lower development cost. But with this next generation coming up, who's to say that this next generation is going to be as successful as the Nintendo Switch? What if dips happen for Nintendo and they do have to lay people off? Will they be villainized over this? The thing about layoffs to me is it's not just exclusive to the video game industry. Layoffs are happening in all sorts of tech, all banking companies. It seems like every week banks are laying off people. Like, it's not just an isolated thing just for the video game industry. It's more of a huge economic thing. The video game industry just gets the publicity because of the fact, and this is going to rub some people the wrong way, people put more emotion into the video game industry than they do something like your local grocery store shutting down or, your bank laying off your favorite teller, because people are friends with people in the video game industry. These journalists, these people constantly talking about it, the people constantly blaming everything else except for the industry itself. They're friends with these people. They have an emotional attachment to them. And I get it. It's definitely a thing. But I think the thing you have to realize is the video game industry, it might have just grown too fast too soon. And then what do you do when things start to happen? What do you do when things aren't going exactly how you plan them to be? So what's the end result of this? Are there going to be more layoffs? Yes. And I hope all those people land on their feet, and I hope they all find sustainable jobs that they're happy with. I'm not trying to diminish their emotions or their feelings or anything like that. But I feel like we haven't heard the last of this. And I feel like there's going to be a bit of a soft reset with the video game industry. Sony's already starting to change their mentality about how they make games and stuff like that. I think we got to the top of the mountain, and then we realized there's still much more mountain to go, and we don't have the capacity. We don't have the funds. We don't have the knowledge in order to climb this next mountain. So sometimes you got to go back down and regroup and reassess. Is the video game industry screwed? Probably. It'll be a reset. You know, it'll be you won't see the output. You know, I think output's actually going to get worse with a lot of these AAA games and stuff like that. But all that's going to do is give the rise to other companies, AA companies with more budget titles, indie companies and stuff like that. They now have the potential to thrive with these long gaps. Look at like the Wii U. Okay. The Wii U had like no first party support from Nintendo for like the first couple of years because Nintendo thought that third parties were going to come in. As someone who covered the Wii U situation heavily, I saw the rise of one-man teams and one-man studios who are able to make a mark on the Wii U eShop and make a name for themselves and essentially create companies and make revenue and generate profits because they realized that there was a gap that they could fix. You know, there was a gap that they could fulfill with this. I don't know. I know I'm kind of all over the place with this, but you know, the video game industry is screwed. It needs a bit of a reset. And if this is the way to do it, you know, it sucks. But at the same time, like, what do you want to happen? You want the whole industry just to crash and then nobody's got a job? Like, I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. I'm trying to, you know, have empathy. But at the same time, I'm not going to have fake empathy like these jerk asses on Twitter have, where it's like, bro, unfortunately, it's just a reality of life. You're probably not going to have the same job. You know how many jobs I had before YouTube? I had a lot of jobs, okay? Some of them I got let go of. Some of them they were going to fire me. Some of them I quit on my own. Like, you know, a door closes, but a window opens. And I sincerely hope that everyone who is impacted by these layoffs does land on their feet. But I just feel like the situation is so much more complex than a lot of people who are friends with these people who work at these companies want to make it out to be. Those are just my thoughts. Those are just my ramblings. Get mad at me in the comments if you want. That's fine. I can handle it. And as always, guys, give me your thoughts in the comments section down below. If you're new to the channel, make sure you hit that subscribe button. And as always, I'll catch you guys on the next video. Later.